John, the Gospel of John, chapter 12, beginning with verse 20. Or in your Pew Bible, simply page 936. I'll let you go there. The title of the sermon, if you haven't already seen it, Not Enough Dying. But you don't want to turn tail and run out the door thinking this is depressing stuff. This is the stuff of life. This is the message of how to live. So hang with it. First, we'll hear it right out of the Word. John 12:20. Now among those who went up to worship at the feast were some Greeks. So these came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew. Andrew went with Philip, and they told Jesus. And Jesus answered them, the strangest thing, really. Didn't say anything about meeting those Greeks. He said, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. He who loves his life loses it. And he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. If anyone serves me, he must follow me. And where I am, there shall my servant be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. Now is my soul troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour?" Of course, he was speaking of the cross, soon to come. "No, for this purpose I have come to this hour. Father, glorify thy name." Then a voice came from heaven, "I have glorified it, and I will again." The crowd standing by heard it and said that it had thundered. Others said, "An angel has spoken to him." Jesus answered, "This voice has come for your sake, not for mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the ruler of this world be cast out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself." He said this to show by what death he was to die. Lifted up on a cross. The crowd answered him, "We have heard from the law that the Christ remains forever. How can you say that the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man?" Jesus said to them, "The light is with you for a little longer. Walk while you have the light, lest the darkness overtake you. He who walks in the darkness does not know where he goes. While you have the light," meaning himself there, "believe in the light, that you may become sons of light." The word of God for we, the people of God. Thank you, Lord.
Jesus calls us o'er the tumult of our lives' wild, restless sea. Day by day his sweet voice soundeth, saying, "Christian, follow me." As of old the
of toil and hours of ease, still he calls in cares and pleasures. Christian, love me more than
Jesus calls us by thy mystery, sing and may we hear thy hearts to thy hearts to thy love thee, that's thy best of all. Jesus calls us for the tumult of our lives, while restless sea. Day by day his sweet voice soundeth, saying, Christians, follow Christians, follow
Amen. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, until we got to John last weekend, we had been going through Mark's gospel. And 2 or 3 Sundays ago, we were at these very verses where Jesus said, if anyone will come after me, let him or her deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For the one who wants to find their life must lose it to me. But the one who is to lose their life will hold on to it. We're going to spend some more time with those thoughts today. But I remind you that whenever that sermon was, we talked about how death is essential. It is a law of life. Death is essential to life. We talked about how with a simple thing like cell death in our bodies, if our bodies do not lose cells to their death, we would end up with a lot more cancer than we already have in this world, and many other diseases and problems. Death is important to life. It is necessary to life. Salmon know this story. They know this truth, that they have an instinct inside of them that they will fight rocks and currents of rivers and force themselves back to the place of their birth, where they will dig a hole in the sand, lay their eggs, and then die. Die that other salmon might live. Only by doing that will there be more salmon. And of course, seeds, Jesus' illustration today. I looked this up because the only thing I can raise are pretty much unkillable plants. I have some philodendron that I've, taken nearly to their grave so many times. Confession. But to grow a flower, no. Grow anything you could eat, not really. But a seed, if you're any kind of farmer or green thumb person, you know that a seed is an embryo, and you put it in the ground, and if the ground is at 40 degrees and remains that way for 40 days, the seed will crack open, and the root will go down, and the shoot will go up, but the seed itself will die, so that the root and the shoot can take over. And from that plant, new seeds are created. We've now had a little botany, biology lesson. For me, the simple mind here, I used to like to eat an avocado, take the pit, put it over some little shallow jar or something with toothpicks to suspend it there, and watch that root go down, and watch the shoot come up, and slowly watch that pit crack apart. Have you ever done that? No more pit if you're going to have an avocado. Jesus says, if we're to have life, we must lose it. Well, let's go back to where he said this and when. And those Greeks, Jesus is in the last week of his life. He's in Jerusalem with his disciples. And he is approached by two of his disciples who have been approached by these Greeks who want to see him. Now, you might have heard about wandering Jews, but there are also wandering Greeks in history. Greeks were wanderers. If anyone's a Greek here, if you want to stand up and give testimony to that. But there's an Egyptian statue near the Nile. You can go to see it to this day. And scratched on there is an ancient scrawling of a Greek tourist's name. They know it's ancient. Greeks like to go. They like to see. They like to learn new things. They wanted to know about the latest religion, the latest philosophy. They were endless wanderers and learners and seekers of truth. So it was not unusual to find Greeks there in Jerusalem for the Passover. Now, maybe they were interested in the goings-on of Judaism because they were converts to Judaism. But they may have just been there to kind of catch this festival of the Jews and see what it was all about. Theologian J.H. Bernard has suggested that the reason that these Greeks wanted to talk to Jesus is because they were actually there to witness him turning over the tables in the court of the Gentiles, the money changer tables, and driving the animals out, driving everybody out. And so they wanted to see this one who had such authority that would dare to do such a thing. For whatever reason, they decide to seek him out, and they go to Philip. Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, which was a largely Greek-speaking province, and he had a Greek name, Philip. So they went to him. But Philip wasn't very bold, I suppose. He went to Andrew, and then they went to Jesus. And Jesus gives the oddest answer. Hey, Jesus, some Greeks want to see you. And Jesus says, the hour or the time has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. This is one of those times among many where Jesus says something and you just scratch your head. I wonder if they knew what he meant. They knew what Son of Man meant. It was a reference to prophecy in the book of Daniel. Daniel has a vision, and he sees these various savage beasts, and they stand for different kingdoms. One is a lion with eagle's wings. One is a bear with ribs in his teeth. One is a winged leopard with 4 heads. One is a beast with iron teeth. And these rise up and conquer and rule for a time. But then Daniel says one comes who is like a son of man, a human being, to rule. And this one's rule will be a rule of love, will be by the power of love, will be gentle and humane and gracious. This one like a son of man. Well, Israel is so small and weak in this time. And they know Jesus is making some reference to himself as that Son of Man, sometimes thought also as the Messiah. Well, how in the world was God going to do this in this small, weak, oppressed country of Israel? It would indeed take God to do it. God would send his champion. God would send that one like a son of man. And they know Jesus is saying he is that one. He says, the hour has come for me to be glorified. Now, the disciples hearing that statement, they would have been thrilled. And in fact, what happens just a short time later when they put him on a donkey's back and he rides through Jerusalem and everyone puts down their cloaks and their palm branches and say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and that they welcome him as king. Well, they would have been thrilled hearing that statement. But then he goes on to say that he's going to be lifted up and that he's going to die. that he's going to be crucified. And that's the lifting up that he's talking about. And then he begins to talk to them about the amazing paradox of finding life. That only by death comes life. As long as a seed is preserved as a seed in safety and security, it's going to remain ineffective. It's going to remain unfruitful. But when it's buried in the cold ground, like a tomb, only then will it bear fruit. Theologian Barclay says, it's always because people have been prepared to die that great things have lived. And it's sometimes only when a person buries their personal aims and ambitions that he or she begins to really be of use to God. Jesus was saying this too. Only by spending life do we keep it, do we retain it. When someone loves their own life, they're motivated to maintain what they want, what they're looking for, what they have, their security, their happiness. They're motivated to maintain that above all else and to keep seeking out new ways to have it. But Jesus insisted many, many times that his way to lose life, his way was to lose life in order to find it. And think about it. What might this world have lost if people hadn't been prepared to lose their life, their safety, their security, for the sake of others? Our world owes everything to people who have recklessly spent their lives for the good of other people and to further God's kingdom. If we seek to preserve our lives, we may exist longer, but we won't live. Only in laying down one's life for others is greatness found. This is the third part of that paradox. The world remembers with love those who have served. If we look at Hebrews chapter 11, it is full of our Bible heroes, of people across the centuries who gave their very lives for the truth that they knew was worth everything. They gave their lives knowing it was true, that even being alive was not more important than that it was, in fact, the whole meaning and purpose of their life. This Jesus, this God who made them and loved them and gave them real life. Did you know that all of the disciples gave their lives for their faith? Peter, he was crucified upside down because he said that being crucified like his Lord was too good for him. Andrew was also crucified. Thomas was run through with a sword in India as he did mission work there. Philip was somehow cruelly put to death. Different traditions about how. Matthew was stabbed to death in Ethiopia. Bartholomew was flayed to death with a whip. James the Less was thrown from the top of the temple, and he didn't die from that, so they beat him to death with clubs. Simon the Zealot was martyred in Persia for refusing to worship the sun god there. Matthias, who replaced Judas Iscariot, he was stoned and then beheaded. John, the disciple John, James and John, he survived being boiled in oil, ultimately was exiled to Patmos, a prison island, and died a long, torturous death of starvation there and exposure to the elements. James, his brother, was beheaded, and so was Paul. Timothy was stoned to death. Mark was dragged around with a rope around his neck through the streets of Alexandria till he died, and Jude was killed with arrows. Barnabas was stoned to death. You don't die for a lie. You don't give everything for something that's not true. This alone makes me say, take my life, Lord. I want to live for you. This truth is worth everything. So Jesus presented to his listeners the glory of giving all for the sake of God and others. You know, he said, "What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. I've come for this hour," he said. He was only 33. I'm sure he hoped he might get married at some point earlier in his life, have a bunch of children, do the things we all hope and dream to do with his life. But God had a far greater plan for him. Jesus knew his death would change everything. He said, "The ruler of this world will be cast out." He would defeat the prince of death and death itself by his death. And we would live because he died. So I put to you that there's not enough dying. Paul wrote, "I urge you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship." Be a living and holy sacrifice. It begins with realizing that we're not the center of the universe like a child, but our childishness dies, and that's when life really begins. It's a dying that admits we've been wrong, we've sinned, we've been grasping at our life, we've been living for ourselves, that confesses that and turns from it. It's a dying that begins in other little ways too, like giving up a seat on a bus, or a seat in a waiting area, or a seat in a sanctuary, that lets others go ahead of us. The small ways that we let go of what we want and our own comforts for people around us. And it's a dying that grows, that risks even more. To meet a stranger when we could stay with people we already know. A new person at school or at work. That lets go of pride, that lets go of self-guardedness, and lets people in. Lets people know what we really feel, what we really think. Shares who we are. Admits its own need. And it's a dying that permits pain. That permits rejection. That permits isolation even, or loss, because we choose to be real and open. And it's a dying to self that makes room. Room for differences in tastes, differences in interests, differences in age, in gender, in race, in culture, in all manner of diversity, that will actually celebrate that diversity as a gift and a blessing. And it's a dying to self that will sacrifice much of itself for the good of others. I read a story about baseball player Adam LaRoche, who was on the White Sox, and they offered him at one point, toward the end of his career, a $13 million contract. But he walked away from it so he could spend time with his son. He said, "What did I want to see on my tombstone? Adam LaRoche, Gold Glove, batting average, whatever it was, hit this many homers in his career." Or Adam LaRoche, man of God, had great integrity, loved his family, raised great kids. There's not enough risking. There's not enough losing so others can win. There's not enough dying that others will live. That's the love of Jesus. That's the kind of love Jesus had. And there isn't enough of it in this world. It's the only force that has ever changed the world. The Greeks, they went to Philip. They said, "We would see Jesus." There are people all around us that would love to see Jesus, but they will not see Jesus if we don't die and carry that cross, our death instrument. Jesus was not interested in his own personal survival. He knew his death was the key to life, and so is ours. Jesus said one more thing. While you have me, walk in the light. Maybe there's somebody here today who has never chosen that, who has never said, yes, Jesus, I see you are life. You are the way to life. You are the truth about life. I need you. Without you, my life will be futility. It will be confusion. It will be endless seeking and wandering. It will be a desperate search to figure out why I'm here. You are my answer. Is that you today? What is the Lord leading you to do? Come, if you need to make that decision public, or you're looking for a church home, or any other decision you need to tell us about. I'll be here to receive you at the front.